Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. This is Kaylee Isaacs here from Maull Mountain Center, and we're so excited to be partnering with Wintour Seminars to offer this evening's presentation with Fleet Maull, exploring how to transform negative drama, as well as his new online course, Radical Responsibility. This evening, Fleet will be taking questions as part of the presentation. So there's a question box just below the video right now. So feel free to ask questions. It's helpful if you ask them as they come up for you in the beginning of the presentation so we can start compiling them and get them to him to answer towards the end of the presentation. It's my honor to introduce Fleet Maull, who is a renowned social activist, peacemaker, and meditation teacher. He is the founder of Prison Mindfulness Institute and co-founder of the Peacemaker Institute and Rwanda Bearing Witness Retreat and Peace Initiative. He is also a sought-after business consultant and executive coach working with business leaders in diverse industries to build healthy and sustainable enterprises with cultures grounded in mindfulness, emotional intelligence, transparency, accountability, and integrity. Fleet offers similar trainings to the general public through his Radical Responsibility and Radical Possibility seminars in cities all around the United States. Thank you so much, Fleet, for joining us here tonight and offering this presentation. And for everyone who's watching, I hope that it is very helpful for you. I'm going to pass you all over now to Fleet Maull.
Okay. Thank you, Kaylee. And hi, everyone. I'm Fleet Maull. And welcome to this webinar. Tonight, we're going to be talking about how to transform the negative drama that we encounter in our lives through mindfulness. And we're going to look at 7 different strategies for really reducing the stress and anxiety, increasing the happiness at home and at work. And we all know that one of the things that gets in the way of our happiness and that really tends to increase the stress that we feel is when what we all think of as negative drama arises within us and around us. So that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. This is a subject, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a model called the drama triangle. But this is a subject that I go into in great depth in my live seminar, the Radical Responsibility Seminar, that some of you may have done with me. And I've been doing them all over the U.S. and Europe for quite some time. The next one's actually going to be in Atlanta, Georgia, early in the springtime. And but one thing I'm really excited about is that I've managed to turn this Radical Responsibility live seminar into an online course. And we'll be talking about that later, but we go into this in great depth in that course. But we're going to be able to really treat it in depth tonight. I think give you some strategies that you'll find will be really helpful in terms of dealing with the drama that you encounter in your own life. Okay, so we talked about that we're going to talk about drama hooks and how to recognize them, how to manage our own physiology and our emotional state. As we know, when we get triggered in situations where there's a lot of drama going on, we have a physiological and an emotional reaction. And then how to communicate our needs and create boundaries in ways that doesn't fuel more drama whenever possible. So let's dive right into it. So the first strategy is really to, if we're gonna avoid getting caught up in drama, we have to learn to recognize what I call our drama hooks, right? We all have them, and they're just like fish hooks, and they're dangling all over the place. And some of them have got my name on them. Some of them I don't know, but there might be a few out there with our host Kaylee's name on them. But I'm sure there's some with all of your names on them. And when I see one of yours go by, I don't really even notice it. It doesn't do much for me. But when one of mine floats by, it's like, oh, that looks good. Oh, I want to swallow that hook. It's got a big juicy piece of bait on it and flashing lights or what have you, and I'm just really attracted to it. And very often I swallow the hook, and then I'm off to the races. So we all know what that's about. So, the first step is really to begin to become familiar with what our hooks are, or sometimes we call these our emotional triggers or our hot buttons, and to become very familiar with them, and really then to make the commitment not to swallow the hook. Now, that's a really important step there because, as we all know, we've been habitually swallowing the hook. And so it takes a real commitment that if we want less drama in our lives, we need to not swallow the hook. We need to see it coming and not swallow it. We're also going to talk about if we have swallowed the hook, how do we get the hook out of our mouth and free ourselves from the situation of being in a lot of drama. So another thing to recognize is that moment when we are hooked, right? So there's a model called Karpman's drama triangle, and again, we go into that in great depth in the Radical Responsibility course. There's 2 full units on it. But it has these 3 poles. It's an inverted triangle, an equilateral triangle with the apex downwards. And at the bottom you have the victim mindset, which simply means I'm not happy, I'm even mildly dissatisfied, uncomfortable, irritated, upset, and I'm attributing the cause of that to something outside myself. That's what we mean by the victim position. And then we have the persecutor position and the rescuer position. And so that was what someone else I think is doing, or it could be the weather, it could be anything, but I'm perceiving someone or something else to be a persecutor. I'm feeling victimized, and then often I go to a third person and triangulate, and now we have the whole triangle, and the thing is off and running, right? So how do we recognize when we've gotten caught in the drama triangle or caught in drama? Well, one thing is our physiological reaction. Very often, especially if we're, it's the kind of situation where we're getting really upset, we're going to notice changes in our breathing. We may find our palms sweating. We're going to notice changes in our posture. We're going to notice changes in our voice. And there may be particular types of language that we use. I mean, if we're really upset and really mad, it's pretty clear I'm caught in a drama of some kind, right? And that doesn't invalidate my feelings, right? We're not talking about invalidating our feelings. We're just talking about recognizing where we are, and so we can do something about it, have a creative response to it, other than just perpetuating self-destructive drama or drama that causes problems for others, right? It can be a little more difficult to recognize when we're triggered into what we might think of as that persecutor position, where we're involved in judgmental, criticizing, or controlling or dominating behaviors, being right, or when we get triggered into that rescuer position where, we think we're desperately needed and we jump into trying to fix someone or fix something, and we're participating in a kind of drama. And we're doing it in such a way that we're not supporting someone as a peer, but we're really coming in as the rescuer to kind of fix someone who we're perceiving to be in the victim position. And that just feeds the drama. So how do we recognize those positions when we may not be that physically upset? Well, one of the ways that we can recognize it is just by learning what our patterns of being a persecutor are. Like, what is our kind of critic or judgmental voice? Or when we go into our kind of control monster, if you will, or just, wanting to control, what's our style of doing that? What's our voice sound like? What are the phrases we use when we're trying to dominate or control, or when we get really critical, or when we're really hooked on being right? The same thing about rescuing. What's that, feeling when I'm feeling, oh, I'm so desperately needed here, and the whole place is going to fall apart without me, and now I have to let go of my own needs to do this. I really should be at home now, but I'm going to stay at, some situation. So we can learn patterns and voice styles and phrases to recognize those polarities when we may not actually feel emotionally upset, but yet we are kind of getting triggered into one of those patterns. So that's recognizing that we're on the drama triangle or hooked in a drama of some kind. And that's obviously the first strategy, is developing that self-awareness, being very familiar with our own drama hooks, our hot buttons, and becoming familiar with the landscape of the ways in which we get triggered into either that upset victim position of feeling helpless and powerless and like somebody's persecuting us or something is, or when we get triggered into that these internal tapes that kind of run our particular persecutor or controller habit, or if we get triggered into that kind of rescuer mode. So having that self-awareness. The second strategy to have less drama in our lives, or to get unhooked from drama when it occurs, is to actually stop when we recognize that we're hooked in a drama. So if we can have that self-awareness, first it might be, I'm so upset, or they're doing that, or how dare they, or something like that. And suddenly I recognize it. I go, oh, okay, drama. I know what this is. This is drama. I'm going to stop. And then here's something I would suggest that's pretty like taking a vow. In many different religious traditions, and even in a secular sense, when we get married, we take vows, and vows create clarity in our life, right? So I would suggest taking this vow, and the vow is don't act when triggered. Do not act when triggered. Do not speak, do not act, just stop. Because when we're triggered, what's happening with our neurobiology is, many of you are familiar with the triune brain idea. We have the reptilian brain, that survival-based, fear-based part, just survival-focused part, kind of very instinctual part of our brain. The midbrain, mammalian brain with the limbic system, that's about emotional processing and memory and language and lots of things. And then our neocortex, the advanced part of our brain where we're capable of all kinds of abstract thinking and complex operations, and where our decision-making powers lie. So when we're getting triggered, we're getting pulled into that instinctual reaction, right? And we often do things and say things that are not so smart, right? Actually, our IQ, our measurable IQ, goes way down the more we are triggered into what's called that fight, flight, or freeze response. When the reptilian brain, to whatever degree, is taking over, it's disengaging what's called the executive function in our neocortex, and we don't make the best decisions. We can operate instinctually. That's what it's designed to do. We're designed, and our physiology is reorganizing itself so we can run like heck, or stand and fight if we need to, or play dead and hope the danger goes by. But we don't make the best decisions. So when triggered, don't act, stop, and realize that at that point we have one and one only job, and that's to get ourselves untriggered, because until we do, we're actually kind of a danger to ourselves and others. Okay, that leads to our third strategy. That is to use different methodologies to get ourselves untriggered, to do what we call state shifting. State shifting. So I'm in an upregulated emotional state. I may be very triggered, very upset, hurt, angry, afraid, all kinds of feelings may be going on, and I'm about to act, I'm about to say something, I'm feeling a little bit out of control, or I may be even in that more calm, triggered kind of thing, but I'm still ready to act because I'm very, it's really engaged me. Maybe it's engaging my more cool, cold persecutor thing. But whatever it is, I know I'm triggered. I know there's something grabbing me, and I need to stop and get myself untriggered. So we use various methodologies for state shifting. So there's one that I'm sure you all know quite well. We've all heard this at some point in our life. Like, when you're angry, do what before you do anything else? Count to 10, right? Now, why do we count to 10? Well, we all know that if we stop and count to 10, by the time we count to 10, we have chilled out a bit, and we're a little less triggered, right? If we would take a deep breath with each count, we would become even more chilled out and less triggered. So what's happening there? Well, first of all, the reptilian brain, which is all about fight, flight, or freeze, it's about survival, can't count. We cannot count with that part of our brain. So by forcing ourselves to count, we're regaining access to the neocortex, right? Which is then going to give us access to the parts of the brain where we can make a more rational choice about how to respond in a given situation. Also, if we breathe, that's, especially if we do deep belly breaths, right? We do deep belly breaths. So 1, 2, 3, like that, nice deep belly breaths. We're engaging the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. Many of you are probably familiar with that idea. The autonomic nervous system is that part of our nervous system that runs most of the operations in our body without us having to be conscious of it. It regulates our breathing, our blood circulation, our heartbeat, our endocrine system, our glandular functions, all kinds of things, our breathing. And so all these operations happen without us having to think about it. That's the autonomic nervous system. It has two branches, and they're like polar opposites. The sympathetic branch is about upregulating, and to the extent that that dominates, it can go all the way into that fight, flight, or freeze response. It shuts down our digestive process, it restricts our bladder operation, it dilates the pupils, dilates the bronchi in the lungs, floods our bloodstream with the type of neurotransmitters and chemicals that will fuel us into action if we have to fight or run. That's the sympathetic branch. The parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system does just the opposite. It begins to slow us down and chill us out and return us to a more relaxed state, what's called the relaxation response. What at Harvard, Herbert Benson coined that term, the relaxation response, which is the engagement of the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. So what engages that? Well, belly breathing engages that, okay, naturally, deep belly breathing. Also, the in-breath is connected with the sympathetic branch, and the out-breath is connected with the parasympathetic branch. So if we extend the out-breath a little longer than the in-breath, we will naturally also be engaging the parasympathetic branch. So I'd like you to do a little exercise with me very quickly here, okay? So just take a good posture in whatever kind of seating arrangement you have. And as you breathe in through the nose, just count, like 1, 2, 3, 4, just whatever your natural count is. And then when we breathe out, we're going to breathe out through pursed lips. And we're going to breathe out 2 or 3 counts longer than the in-breath. So if we're breathing in through the nose for, let's say, a 5 count, we'll breathe out through pursed lips for a 7 or 8 count. Okay, let's do that for just a minute. Okay, that was very short, but I would imagine that you were able to feel your system beginning to relax. I certainly could as I was doing it. There are many methods like this for state shifting. Posture is important. Sitting up with a good posture, what my teacher Trungpa Rinpoche called good head and shoulders, or standing with good posture, starts to return us to an adult mindset, because when we're really triggered, we tend to sort of collapse physically or maybe go into an aggressive posture. So if we stand or sit with a good uplifted posture, that will begin to return our physiology to normal. Also, using our voice, speaking in a calm, clear voice. So in the middle of a crisis situation, someone who can speak in a very calm, clear voice and direct people to do what's needed is very helpful. So paramedics and first responders of all kind are trained that in the middle of a crisis, they remain calm, and with a calm but clear voice, they direct people what to do. And that also is a way to return our physiology to a normal state. So you have posture, you have voice, and you have various breathing methodologies. One more breath that's helpful. If you find yourself really panicking, like, sometimes when we get really triggered, we might go almost into hyperventilation, like we're breathing very quickly with the chest, which is again activating the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, and we might get really excited, really panicky. So if we found ourselves doing that, like really feeling panicky, really shaky, and chest breathing, shallow breathing, right? What you would do then is you immediately do one very long exhale through your mouth. You go. So let's try that, if you will. Bear with me here while we're on the webinar together. Just kind of do that. Get yourself in that shallow breathing really quickly, and then do that long out breath. So. So what happens after the long exhale? Well, of course, what happens is a long inhale, right? And that interrupts the pattern of the hyperventilation and the panic. Now, we might have to do that 2 times, 3 times, but it will interrupt the pattern, and we'll find ourselves returning to normal breathing. Because when you do force yourself to do a long exhale, you cannot help but do a long, when you force yourself to do, yes, a long exhale, you cannot help but do a long inhale afterwards. So those are some simple state shifting techniques. You can also get out and go for a walk. If you're able to extricate yourself from a situation, maybe you're in a meeting, you're getting triggered, you do a little breathing without anybody noticing, or maybe excuse yourself, go to the bathroom, splash some water in your face, work with posture, work with breathing. But you can do these things to bring your own physiology back into a more balanced state. So that was number 3, the third strategy, to state shift, to get ourselves untriggered. So the fourth strategy is how we really begin to work with a trigger in a more reflective way. So the fourth strategy is to use our voice. Now what we mean there is internally to begin with, we're going to use our voice to acknowledge to ourselves what's going on with us. It actually may not be a good idea to use our voice externally at that time because maybe we're still too triggered, right? So, but what it means is we don't stuff it, because very often with the bumps and bruises of life and the times we feel mildly triggered or even a lot triggered, and we don't do anything about it because we're conflict avoidant, we're afraid of making it worse, or so we just stuff that in our resentment bag. Another time I was disrespected, the slings and arrows, and we keep filling up that resentment sack, and it gets heavier and heavier. And we do not want to carry around resentments in our life, these stored negative feelings. It's very toxic for ourselves, and inevitably at some point we're going to hit somebody over the head with that resentment bag we've been filling up for years. So the message here is don't stuff it, right? So use our voice to acknowledge internally to ourselves to begin with what's going on with ourselves. So that's the fourth strategy. That leads right into the fifth strategy, which is with our voice internally to actually own our feelings, to acknowledge to myself what's going on with me. So instead of, like, well, you're really pissing me off, or you're doing this, or how dare they, that where I'm using you language or they language, and I'm projecting what I'm feeling onto others. I'm projecting the causation of my internal state onto others, and I'm involved in blaming kind of language, which, especially if I do it verbally, is going to fuel the drama. Instead, I simply own what I'm experiencing. So I go to myself internally, wow, I'm really angry, or I'm really upset, I'm hurt, or I'm afraid, or I'm really sad. And there's probably lots of feelings. There may be all those and more. So I'm acknowledging internally to myself what I'm feeling, and I'm using I statements instead of you statements, right? And so I'm moving from projection to reflection, from blaming to ownership. I'm owning my own experience. If I'm experiencing anger, it may seem like it's being triggered by an external thing, but it's actually nonetheless my anger. It's my internal experience. So to do that, again, that also is part of beginning to state shift, because the reptilian brain, remember, if we're really caught in that fight, flight, or freeze response, the reptilian brain cannot do this kind of reflection, right? So the part of my brain that will allow me to go, wow, I'm really angry, and actually I'm feeling very afraid and upset, and I'm worried that, and I'm irritated, and I'm frustrated, and the part of me that can own those feelings and reflect on that is not the reptilian brain. So that's taking me further into reflective mode, which is also starting to chill me out, balance out my physiology, right? So I'm owning my feelings. So that was the fifth strategy. The sixth strategy is then to reflect on what's underlying my feelings. Now, some of you may have done some work like this already and understand what feelings are connected to, but almost all of us, no matter how much we've studied, in the moment are pretty convinced our feelings are caused by others, right? You're doing that and it's making me mad, right? You're doing that and it's frustrating me or irritating me. We immediately, the minute we're having an uncomfortable feeling, we almost immediately look outwards for the cause of it. And it feels very convincing that somebody's doing X and I'm experiencing Y. But that's not actually the case. What's actually happening is that in a given situation, I'm perceiving that my needs are being met or they're not being met, or that my needs are challenged. What are human needs? We all have the same needs: food, warmth, shelter, love, respect. We all need connection with others, and we all need our own space and autonomy. So these basic needs we all share, and there's a lot more of these, right? Need for creativity and so forth. So when my basic needs are getting met, how do I feel? I feel good, glad, all the warm and fuzzy feelings, happy, content, peaceful. When my needs are not being met, or I feel that they're being met as threatened, right? I'm worried my needs won't be met. I start to have all the uncomfortable feelings of fear and anger, and sadness, and even jealousy or hatred or irritation, frustration. So even though we think our feelings are triggered by external events, actually our feelings arise in response to our perception that our needs are being met or not. Now, what drives that perception? You might think, well, it's the external event. Well, actually, no. The same external event could create a completely different experience for lots of people. So our perception of whether external events are meeting our needs or not is based on our own conditioning. It's based on the meaning that we add to things, right? So it's very much an internal process. But to begin with, the helpful thing is to at least get in touch with our needs. So I feel I'm angry. Why am I angry? Well, I was at work, and the memo got put up, and somebody's made a decision, and I don't even know if I have a job anymore. It seems like it's rearranged my whole work life, and I'm really upset. I'm afraid. I'm confused. And I'm sorry, my boss, they never talk to anybody. They never listen to anybody. They just make these decisions. I'm off to the races, right? But I've been able to reflect on it, take some time to reflect. What's going on here? Well, I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm afraid. Well, why? What's going on? Well, my need for inclusion is not being met. My need for autonomy in the workplace is not being met. My need for a certain level of agency and control in my own job is not being met. My need for respect is not being met. So I'm getting in touch with the underlying needs that are going on. Now, that is even further down-regulating me, further shifting my physiology, because it really takes a reflective mindset and full access to my brain to be able to do that kind of deeper reflection. So I get in touch with my needs. Now, at some point, if I feel I'm balanced enough and chilled out enough, which might be in a minute, it might be in a half hour, it might be in 2 hours, or it might be the next day or 3 days later or a month later. It depends on the situation. But I will, when I feel I'm able to do that, I may go to someone who I felt I was in conflict with or upset by. And at that point, I may be able to say, the other day when this happened, I have to tell you, I was really upset, and I've had a chance to really reflect on it, and I'm glad I took that chance, because I didn't want to just blame it on you, and it's really not you, it's me. I realized that I was having all these feelings, I was quite frustrated, and it's because the way that played out, my need for some agency in my job and including different things weren't being met. And I know it's not your responsibility to meet those needs, but I thought we could talk about it a little bit, because maybe in the future there's some ways that we could do these things where everybody's needs would be getting met more, including yours. So I could have some conversation like that where I'm being honest and transparent about my feelings. I'm owning them. I'm not blaming them on that person. I'm being clear about what my needs are. I'm willing to express them without putting a demand on that person, making them responsible for my needs, but I'm just giving them information and then having a conversation where they don't have to defend themselves, and maybe we can come up with a win-win where we can find a way that everybody can get a reasonable set of their needs met in a mutual way. But at the very least, I've already validated my needs to myself, which in a sense already meets my needs. Even if I'm not able to communicate them to another person in a way that they will be appreciated or really included by that person, but if I've acknowledged them and owned them in myself to the extent that already meets my needs, just by validating it to myself. So that was strategy number 6, to really reflect on and clarify my needs and be able to state them clearly in ways that are good information for people that don't create conflict but help us come to win-win solutions in the relational field at home and at work. Then strategy 7, okay, well sometimes we just have to make a boundary. Sometimes, in order to get off the drama triangle, we just have to say, look, this communication isn't really going anywhere, or if you're going to speak in that way, I don't really want to engage in this moment. Let's come back to this to a time when we both have cooler heads. Or, I can't continue this communication right now. We may just have to make a boundary. Or, so this just doesn't work for me. Now, of course, when it's, a power relationship with our boss, it can be difficult to make a boundary and could be risky to make a boundary. So we may want to, really think carefully. That's why I get untriggered before we go making any boundaries. But, if we're in a crisis situation with someone, we might have to make a boundary, So and we have to use our intelligence with all of this. But sometimes to get off the drama triangle, we have to make a boundary. Now, we can avoid a lot of drama if we have good boundaries to begin with. What are boundaries? A lot of us get confused about what does it mean to make boundaries. It's a pretty simple idea having boundaries. Having good boundaries means I know when to say no to myself, and I know when to say yes to myself. I also know when to say no to others and when to say yes to others. If I can't say no to myself, in other words, delay gratification in order to dedicate myself to some effort that may not be my favorite thing to do, I'm never going to get very far in life. If I can never say yes to myself, I'm really not going to experience any joy in life. So having that discernment of knowing when to say no and when to say yes is that wisdom of discernment that we're all working towards. And same thing with others. If I can't say no to others, I'm inviting chaos into my life. If I'm saying yes to everybody and people pleasing and I don't know how to say no, I'm going to become overwhelmed and I'm inviting chaos in my life. At the same time, if I can't say yes to others, I'm not going to have any relationship in my life. So again, knowing when to say no and when to say yes to others and myself. That's the idea of having boundaries. And then the other part is really doing the work to create good agreements with people. Right? Often we do not do our due diligence. We don't even create good verbal agreements, much less written contracts, where we really should. You know, we want to get involved in something, whether it's a friendship or a partnership or a business partnership or even a marriage sometimes, and we don't do our due diligence, and we just jump in there and go along, and we're going down the road, you know, holding hands, you know, whistling in the dark, kind of, I hope it'll work out, I think it'll work out, and then it blows up, and it's even worse because we had no agreements. So before we get into various levels of partnership with others of any kind, whether it's around personal life stuff or around business or professional things in our life, do our due diligence. Does this make sense? Because often, if we do the due diligence, we may see there's no deal here. There is no win-win. We don't belong in this business deal or this relationship. It doesn't make sense. So do our due diligence, and then depending on the level of the relationship, make some kind of agreement. And the higher the risk, the more, you know, that's why we have lawyers with high risk agreements, because we work out a very thorough written contract. So making clear agreements and keeping them. Keeping our agreements with ourselves and with others. And when something happens and we can't keep an agreement, sometimes the earth does shift on its axis, we can't keep an agreement, then proactively renegotiate the agreement, right? Don't avoid the person, avoid the situation. Just simply go to the person and say, look, this happened. I really regret that I can't keep my agreement, but I want to renegotiate it right now, get a new agreement in place, and I will keep that. So having good agreements and good boundaries can remove a lot of the negative drama out of our lives. So I hope these 7 strategies, you'll find them very helpful, and we'll post this somewhere, so you'll have access to it. You'll get this, and we're going to open up for questions now. And after the questions, you'll have access to be able to look at this Radical Responsibility online course, which is going to start November 16th and run for 12 weeks. There will be 9 weeks of content, but because of the holidays, we're going to give people 12 weeks to complete it. And in there, we go into all of this drama and working with drama in great depth. But anyway, I think you'll find these 7 strategies very useful. So let's open up the questions. Let's see what we have here. Okay. I got to figure out how to scroll here. There we go. Okay. Well, there's a question about practice. You know, you know, when we don't have the urgency in our life. You know, when I got out of prison, people were asking that because I was, you know, being in prison for 14 years created huge transformation in my life. I was lucky I was a practitioner before I went in, which kind of begs the question of how I went. But suffice it to say, I was pretty hard-headed. But you know, people would ask me, short of getting sent to prison or getting a cancer diagnosis or some other thing that creates this huge sense of urgency in our life, how do we motivate ourselves to practice? Well, it's a very good question, you know. But what we understand about the neurobiology of habit is helpful. You know, you kind of just have to do it. But if you'll do a habit for 45 days, it becomes thoroughly ingrained. And if you keep it up for a year, you'll do it for the rest of your life. You probably wouldn't even have to do it for a whole year, but 45 days will really ingrain a new habit very solidly. And probably if you even keep that up for a good solid 6 months, it's going to be a habit for the rest of your life. So in some ways to start, you just have to do it. But I'll give you one little other thing that I learned, and that's to expect resistance. I was always wanting to do my daily practice and expecting to want to do it. But I'd always say, oh, I don't have time today, or oh, I'm not feeling so well. Oh, I forgot to do that thing I got to do, or oh, I don't know today. I just need a break today. I'm gonna go do this, right? So I got to for years I would just buy into those thoughts and then didn't do my practice that day. When I finally kind of woke up to this, I realized that those messages could help me. And that literally, if I had a scheduled time for practice, like let's say I'm practicing at 7 a.m. in the morning, or I'm practicing, let's say, at 7 p.m. at night, well, I'll guarantee if I'm scheduled to practice at 7 p.m. at night, right around 6:30 or 6:40, I'm going to start having resistance thoughts. And if I learn to recognize those, kind of make friends with that and go, oh, yep, they're right on time, time to practice. Thank you for reminding me, resistance thoughts. And you can just walk with those resistance thoughts right to the cushion. So expect the resistance, inoculate yourself, and make friends with it, and use it as reminders to practice. That's one thing I found very helpful. Let's go. I hope that was helpful to you, Warren. Let's go on, Elizabeth. Yeah, stopping when triggered, but what if it's something really ugly that we have to respond to? Well, it's a matter of degree. It's a good question, Elizabeth, because sometimes we might be in a crisis situation where we just have to respond. So we do the best we can. Very quickly take a deep breath. Feel your feet. At one point, one of my colleagues, a co-trainer of mine, used to train us an idea, just feel your feet. And that immediately grounds you. So, paramedics are trained, and other first responders are trained to somehow shift into a calmer mode right in the midst of crisis. So, we can practice that and work with that, how we can very quickly shift ourselves into a place where we at least have a chance of making a better decision when we actually are required to respond in some way. But there are many, many circumstances where we can actually take some space internally for a minute or two, or where we can actually step away from the situation altogether for the time we need. But that's a good question, Elizabeth. And when it's really a crisis, we just have to do the best we can. But if we're practicing these kind of techniques and practicing state shifting techniques, then we'll be more likely to be able to implement it on the spot, even if we have to do it when we really have to respond anyway. So let's say, Anna. Anna, we'll go into the course schedule. It's going to be, I don't know if it's there yet, but you'll see under your window here, there's a whole description of the course talking about what it's about and the whole course schedule in there. It shows 9 modules there, and I apologize, we're still fine-tuning the course, but there's actually going to be 8 modules, I believe, and those will be offered, and you'll have 12 weeks to complete them. They'll go on regular weeks. We'll take the week off for Thanksgiving. We'll take the week off for Christmas holiday, and then we'll have a couple weeks at the end of the course to help anybody catch up if they got behind. But that's all listed there in the explanation. So Brian, how difficult is it to practice the Dharma while you're incarcerated, and what point did you find? Well, as I mentioned before, I was involved in Buddhist practice and study for 10 years before I went to prison, which shows you how hard-headed I was. But I got caught in some habitual patterns back in the 60s, one of those people that came up through the 60s, the whole counterculture thing. I was living outside this country. I got involved in some small-time drug smuggling as a way to live outside the system, justified it with all kinds of things, developed this outlaw mentality, us versus them thinking, but then went back, got involved in the Dharma, got a master's degree in contemplative psychotherapy, got very deeply involved in the Dharma, and still had part of my life caught up in substance abuse and alcohol abuse, and still doing this smuggling, and it took me a long time to untangle it. The good news is that when I did get locked up, that completely woke me up, and I was actually devastated. Primarily, I was devastated about what I'd done to my community, how I disappointed my teacher, what the scandal I brought to my family. But I was incredibly devastated about what I did to my son, who was 9 years old at the time and was now going to grow up without his dad. And I was just devastated. So when the cell doors closed, I was extremely motivated to practice. I was practicing like my hair was on fire, and I made my whole life about practice and discipline and study and service and I wanted to try to create some legacy, even if I never got out of prison or didn't survive prison, that I'd create a better legacy for my son than just his dad went to prison and died there or something. So I was extremely motivated to practice when I was in prison. And, you can read some of the stories. I have a book called Dharma in Hell that talks about it, that you can find on the Prison Mindfulness Institute website. It's just prisonmindfulnessinstitute.org, where you can find all about our prison work, and you can see that book there, where there's a lot of essays about the life of a practitioner in prison. But thank you for that question, Brian. The things that are already in our resentment bag. Yeah, well, that's a great question. I don't know, for anyone that's been involved in recovery, 12-step recovery of any kind, they talk a lot about resentments because resentments will take us back into our drinking or drugging and actually kill us. So they work very hard to clear out resentments. They do a lot of reflective exercises to go through and get all those resentments out on paper and to really figure out ways to work through them. There's actually a quote towards the end of the Alcoholics Anonymous Big Book, where an anonymous Christian minister suggests this practice. It says, when you're holding a deep resentment against someone, just pray for that person and pray that they would receive all the wonderful things in life that you would like to receive, or you would like your loved ones and family to receive. Now, to begin with, you're going to have to fake it till you make it, because the way you really feel, you might like that person to slip in front of a bus, if you're honest with yourself. But, even though you're feeling that way, you just do it and do it and do it. And what that Christian minister said, what hundreds of thousands of people have found to be true, or perhaps millions, is to keep up the practice, it eventually dissolves the resentment, and you find your feelings towards that person shifting. Now, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we have a similar practice called Tanlin, which was a critical practice for me all during my prison years, because when I first got locked up, there were a lot of former associates of mine that, I totally I totally embraced 100% responsibility for the fact that I got myself in the prison, and I knew that was my only path to freedom, was to embrace 100% radical responsibility. At the same time, there were lots of people around me that had done things that helped me along the way to get there, and I could have had all kinds of resentments. In fact, I had a lot of brewing resentments, and I worked very hard to dissolve those through Tanlin practice. And I did come out of prison with no resentments whatsoever. In fact, I really was able to dissolve those during my early years in prison and live a life free of that kind of resentment. So those are some strategies for working with resentments. The work of Fred Luskin, I would recommend. You can Google Fred Luskin. He's done a lot of work around forgiveness and really understanding the neurobiology and psychology of how we create resentments and grievances, how they get created, and then how we can deconstruct them. So a great question, Brian. Let's see, what is the best way to deal with, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't Brian, but whoever question it was, thank you. Shanti. Yeah. Well, Shanti, I don't think you're the only person, and I don't mean to make light of it at all, but I know you're not the only person that when you get on the phone with your mother, you get triggered into past kind of childhood stuff and experiences. I think a lot of people do that when they get their mother on the phone, or when they go home for Thanksgiving or home for Christmas. I just heard this, from thousands of people. They suddenly feel like they're 7 years old and they're caught up in this whole dynamic, and it could literally be, if there is some real trauma back there, it could literally be kind of a PTSD thing. So, that's a tough one. And I've also worked with colleagues and people I've coached who did have some serious trauma with their parents, and even that it was some kind of significant or serious abuse, and they had to elect just to have no contact with their parent. Now, that's a very difficult thing, and I think that's a means of last resort. But if it is that serious for you, I would get help. I would work with a therapist around this and try to find some way that you can work with your own physiology, create reasonable boundaries with your mother, so you can create a safe space for communicating with her, and manage that triggering. You may even have to let your mother know. You may have to be somewhat transparent about it. Mom, when I get on the phone with you, or when you say these things, I just find myself getting triggered, and I don't want to be this, but this is what happens. So can we work together to try to communicate in a way that so you may have to let her know what's going on, and invite her at least to participate in helping ameliorate it. She may or may not be willing to do that. But I would really encourage you to have the assistance of either a therapist or a life coach or someone like that to help you find a safe way to communicate with your mother. But this is when it's happening in just a mild way, it's a common thing that I think millions of people are dealing with. If it's happening in a very serious way because it's related to early childhood trauma or abuse of some kind, then I think you should really get some support around it. But thank you for that question, Shanti. Yeah, practice is more than sitting on a cushion, as Warren asked. What else do we do? Well, you know, the relation between moment-to-moment practice, what sometimes we call meditation in action or mindfulness in action, and formal sitting practice is an important one. Because without the formal practice, even though we have a strong intention, it's often hard to remember to be mindful or to practice or to follow our intentions in the moment. When we have a regular daily sitting practice of some kind, that brings more mindfulness and awareness into our life, and we more naturally just throughout the day kind of come back. We wake up out of a daydream or out of being distracted, and we go, oh, and we also are more likely to remember our intentions, to remember to not act when triggered, and so forth. But, you know, we can also bring intentionality into particular rituals. Like, for example, when I'm brushing my teeth every morning, I try to remember to just really be present and enjoy the water, the motion, the whole thing, feeling my mouth feeling cleaner rather than my thoughts being a million miles away. Or you could do it, you know, while shaving or when we're eating a meal. Instead of being distracted and, you know, an hour later not even hardly remembering what we ate, we could say, I'm really going to slow down and enjoy this meal and really, you know, be with the presence of the intention to use my fork and pick up and put the food in my mouth and really taste the food and slow down and chew the food completely. So we can have intentionality to bring practice into our lives. Also, this practice of becoming aware of our trauma hooks is a really good way to bring practice into our life. To make that commitment, like I'm not going to participate in drama. When at work or other places, I walk into a situation where people are gossiping and engaged in that kind of drama-producing behavior, I'm just going to disengage. I'm going to walk away from it. I'm going to make that commitment to not act when triggered. I'm going to take space and get myself untriggered. If I need to, I'll ask for that space. You know, having that commitment and then saying, you know, I really need to get to know all my drama hooks. I want to get really curious about that, my hot buttons. You know, many of you have probably read Pema Chodron's books. She uses the Tibetan word for this, Shempa, right? And talks about how we get hooked. Shempa means hook. And we get hooked and we're off to the races, right? So we need to become, in fact, she even says when we get really familiar with those hooks, then they start to put on disguises, right? So we have to even ramp up our awareness further, right? So, you know, that's a whole practice in of itself. Also, you know, what is my style of going into persecutor mode? What is my style of being in my victim thinking? What is my style of being a rescuer? You know, how does my physiology react to drama? You know, just really getting curious about that is a way that we can really bring the practice and the moment-to-moment practice into our life. Yeah. Okay, well, those are great questions. Thank you very much, and I've really enjoyed being on the webinar. So, you know, if you just look down below here, I think you'll see that there's a whole description of this Radical Responsibility course there. If not, there's at least a link that you'll be able to click to after this. And we're offering a very special offer for just 48 hours. So I think it's good until 9 p.m. Eastern time this Friday. So we're at Wednesday. 48 hours from now, this is open for that time, where the course, which normally will sell for $297, which is not very expensive for a 12-week course, so it has a huge amount of content in it. Let me say a little about the course. Okay, the course is, you have these modules, and then each course has a number of units. Some have 2 units, some have 5 units, and each unit will be a video that you'll watch, and it's a live video from a Radical Responsibility live seminar. And you'll watch that, and then you'll respond to questions asking you to respond and reflect on what you've watched. In some places, you'll be doing reflective exercises that'll be guided on the video, or there'll be a placard asking you to stop the video and do this reflective exercise. And there'll be a number of these in every module. So all together, there's quite a few units, and then you'll also participate in a private Facebook group where with the people who are in the course, you'll be able to continually dialogue, any time of night or day, go on and see what's happening with the discussion, and dialogue about the material in the course, about your experiences of working with it. And this is, of course, it's a training in mindfulness-based emotional intelligence. So this drama triangle work is just one piece of it. This goes into great depth in terms of how we can see this idea of embracing radical responsibility really is the doorway to self-empowerment and true freedom in life, true possibility in life, and how along the way we can become more and more emotionally intelligent, which means greater self-awareness, greater capacity to self-manage, greater social awareness and empathic awareness, and more effectiveness in our relationships in the relational field, right? And all of that grounded in and integrated with mindfulness practice. So that's what the course is about. And again, for 48 hours, you can get it for $197, $100 off, and also you'll get the archive of the whole digital library for the Awaken the World, the Shambhala Mountain Center Awaken the World full digital library. That gets included in there, and that was a $97 value that I think as of today may have gone up to $125 or something like that, but you'll get that included. Then you'll also get a 1-year subscription to my premium website where you'll have access to my video archive, which is being built now, and a free coaching video that'll come out once a month, every month. So that's kind of the basic membership level in my website, and you'll get 1-year subscription to that, which is a $300 value because it's $25 a month to have that access. So this comes to something like I think $684 altogether, and you can get it right now for $197. So look at that, see if it's something you'd be interested in. I think you'll find tremendous value in it, and I'm really excited to be able to offer this online. I've been doing this seminar all around the U.S. and in Europe under different names for about 14 years, continually refining it. It's been under the name Radical Responsibility for about the last 3 or 4 years, and I'm so excited now to be able to offer it to a much wider audience through this online course. Using all the wonderful technology that's available to us now to offer things like this. So thank you very much for joining our live webinar, and I'd like to thank you again for joining Awaken the World. I sure had a lot of fun hosting the Waking Up to Service part and dialoguing with Roshi Bernie Glassman and Roshi Joan Halifax and Angel Kyoto Williams and Shiva Ray. And so if you haven't watched those conversations, I encourage you to go back and do that. And if you haven't yet purchased the digital library, you may as well purchase it along with this course and get a great deal doing so. So I'll turn it back over to Kaylee Isaacs. So thank you all very much, and wish you a very good evening.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Fleet, for that wonderful presentation. I hope that you all enjoyed it, and have a wonderful evening. Good night.